Hello, everybody. This is Bo Adams from Atlanta at Unboundary, talking to Grant Lichtman on his Ed journey. We've been on a couple of weeks hiatus because of a Thanksgiving break, and Grant spent a week in Memphis. Grant, how are you? How are things since you were in Atlanta?
Things are great, mostly because I got to go home for a week at Thanksgiving since I was in Atlanta. Had a wonderful Thanksgiving rest, flew back to Memphis, and just finished a great week in Memphis, and I'm on my way to Dallas now for the last week of the trip.
Fantastic. Well, we read a lot of fantastic blog posts this week from you about the Memphis schools. It seems like there's a great deal of innovation going on in Memphis. I had not really thought of it as the innovation hotbed in the Southeast, but it is in a lot of ways. We can read about the individual schools, but will you connect some of the dots for us? What do you see as the threads that patch all of that together?
You know, Bo, one of the really important threads, I think, is that, as we all know, Memphis is really a deeply divided city in a lot of ways. It's racially divided, it is economically divided, and the schools, the whole education system reflects that. The public schools have been going through some real turmoil recently in terms of whether the school districts in the suburbs are going to split off from the larger school district and what that means for different populations. And so I think one of the real through-going threads is the commitment that the greater Memphis community has to really trying to do two things at once. One, which is innovate, and the schools I visited, primarily, of course, public or private schools, trying to innovate for the quote-unquote 21st century, or for the teaching students for their future, but also not making that exclusive to a single population, to a minority, white, relatively affluent population. And so, I really want to highlight the commitment that St. George's School has done, which I have not seen on this journey of mine. And frankly, I haven't heard of it from other schools, of an independent school setting up a campus, an entire campus, elementary school campus in the inner city, funding 90% of the tuition, and really proving up in a more than a model, more than a pilot, that we can take students from disadvantaged backgrounds and really prepare them to compete at the highest level if we just put good education forward. And so I really applaud them for that, and I think and I hope the Memphis community is really looking at that carefully, at that model, and supporting it. And I know the other private schools I talked to are also really cognizant of this fact, that they don't want to become good education just for a small part of the population, but they want to broaden that base. So that was one of the through-going topics of the week, I think.
That's a great point. I love the way that post begins with St. George, slaying the dragon, maybe a mural within the school, and slaying that dragon of inequality. It reminded me so much of the schools of Finland that get so much press for being the best schools in the country, and largely I think it's because they define their system as the whole country rather than just individual schools. And it sounded like St. George and many of the Memphis schools are defining their system as a much bigger, broader community than just an individual school system.
Well, I think they are globally thinking about that, absolutely. And as you are at Unboundary, really thinking about how we can take these ideas of education for the future. And we don't win this battle if it's just for an elite, or for whether they're public or private schools, if they're just for the schools that have a certain amount of resources. So I think schools like St. George's, Hutchinson, PDS, are really looking at this very, very deeply and are committed to it.
Yeah, I think you and I have an upcoming conversation with Bob Dylan and Philip Cummings about an article that touches on that too, from a recent NAIS publication.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Second question, you and I have been talking about this on and off for almost as long as we've known each other, but I thought of a different way to phrase the question this time. What you're seeing and what you're learning on your journey, do you see that school innovation is more like a mall, or more like an orchestra? So the mall being a big box where individual innovative teachers can set up shop and do things the way they want to autonomously in their classroom, and the school benefits from having a mall full of interesting stores and shops? Or is it more like an orchestra where you certainly have individual sections, the string section, the brass section, even within the strings, the violins, the cellos, the violas, but they all have to be playing from the same sheet of music, which seems different than the mall analogy. What are you seeing?
Well, I think those are great analogies, and I think schools have been successful at both. But here's the but. I think the schools that have evolved their innovation strategies using your mall analogy are ones that have had some more luxury of time to do that. So that sort of organic development of a teacher as a proprietor of a store in a mall, it takes time. In the past, we've had time. Going forward, the rate of change of the world I don't think is going to allow us to do that. And so I think having leadership that sets that broad music in place, or has folks all playing generally to the same tune going forward, I think is extremely important. And those schools that I've run into where you do have that sort of sense that the principals or the heads are not coming in and saying, you have to do this to an individual teacher. They're giving that latitude. They're allowing risk to take place. They're allowing people to fail. But they're saying, this is the direction we're going. As the folks in Memphis said, they use an analogy of a riverboat because they're right there on the river, so it's appropriate. And they said, I think it was the folks at St. Agnes, St. Dominic. They said, we're all on the same boat. We may be doing a lot of different things on the same boat, but we need to be on the boat, or if not, then we shouldn't be at this school.
Yeah, that's great. Final question for today. Just curious about what you're seeing in terms of innovation in the means of students really being the primary curators of their learning. I think even at some incredibly innovative schools, the adults are still curating most of the lessons. Are you seeing more and more, as you're reflecting on your whole trip, examples of students really being the primary curators of the lesson plans per se?
Bo, I think this is probably when we end up talking about these stages, and you and I have talked about this, of being able to sort of define stages of where schools are. I think that's going to be one of the hallmarks or characteristics of a school that is quote unquote got it, or is there. And I don't know that I've been at a school where I've seen that like I did at Presbyterian Day School in Memphis this last week. It's an elementary school, and it's hard to describe in words. As a matter of fact, I was thinking when I was there over this last week a couple of times of trying to describe it to principal friends of mine and say, gee, they're doing this, and why aren't you doing this? The best way to describe it is tell them, get on an airplane and come see it. You have students who are so deeply owning their own learning, and teachers are just these students they're creating their own questions, they're setting up their own problems, they're setting up their own systems approach to it, they're curating their own outputs, they're presenting those outputs, and these are elementary school kids.
Yeah, I was just about to say, for people that aren't familiar with PDS in Memphis, that we're talking pre-K to sixth graders.
Yeah, these are senior kindergartners creating their own class blog, fifth graders thinking in the most systematic ways. I tell you what, it warmed the cockles of my heart thinking about 30 years ago of coming up with the ideas for the Falconer, and people telling us you can't even teach this stuff or allow students at 12th grade to do this, and here are elementary school students just performing beautifully as owners and curators of their own learning. So it's absolutely possible. That's what we want to show people, paint the picture for folks of what's possible, and that to me is sort of going to be one of the pinnacle achievements, I think, of schools getting there where there is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Grant, thanks, and for me, it's bittersweet that you're coming to the last week of your trip. Your insights are invaluable, and I always love talking to you from the road. And good luck on this last week of school visits.
Great, thanks, Bo, and thanks for keeping in touch with me. And I hope we'll have one more wrap-up video when I get back to San Diego.
Absolutely, it'll make it a full dozen episodes.
All right. Thanks very much.
Take care.
Take care.